Hello, and welcome to episode 38 of Peace Matters, a podcast on contemporary geopolitics and international relations. My name is Jerzy Loka. I'm the project assistant at the International Institute for Peace. In this episode, we will explore democratizing security, especially in the context of European defense. Amidst geopolitical uprisings across the globe, where does that leave Europe as a security actor? And is the public's opinion even on the table? This and more will be discussed shortly. I'll be having this discussion with two very special guests from two very different backgrounds. Brigadier General Tomasz Kowalik, he is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Support at NATO's Multinational Corps Northeast Poland, and Teresa Coratella, she's the Deputy Head of Office and Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. I hope you enjoy this episode. Teresa, Tomasz, thank you so much for joining us at the IIP office. It's a pleasure to see you once again. To give some context into this episode, I feel like we need to first address why we're gathering here. The IIP has been a part of an ongoing initiative in the sense of what democratizing security actually means, specifically in the context of Europe. So behind this backdrop, we're going to discuss this with you today. You both come from very different backgrounds, so it will be interesting to kind of analyze Europe as a security actor through the military sense and also a more policy-oriented approach as well. My question is, specifically in the rise of geopolitical tensions in the world, we think of Venezuela, we think of what's happening currently in Iran, we also think of obviously the war in Ukraine, the Middle East as a whole. How do you see the European Union as a security actor nowadays? And do you see it more independent, standing more on its own, or rather do you see it being retracted from the overall security dilemma or debate? I would start with you first, Teresa.
Thank you a lot for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here. Well, we start with a very important question because I think is at the core of our daily thinking, strategic thinking as a researcher and analyst trying to support national and European policymakers. We can say that, of course, these are not very easy times for Europe. We are facing the additional challenge, and I think it's already 20 years we are in this kind of challenging and crisis management status. We had, of course, the financial crisis, then we had the migration crisis, COVID, which was something really that hit our society in a very unprecedented ways. Then we have the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was a shock especially for some member states, like the southern European ones, who have been looking for decades at war with a very distanced approach, a very distant cultural view and vision of war. So the invasion came, it hit us, it caused a lot of divisions, but until 1 year ago, we all knew that we could still rely on our main partner, namely the United States, our economic partner, our cultural and value partner, and our security partner. So now we have entered, it's already 1 year, with the second President Trump presidency. We have entered this new additional phase of uncertainty where it's very sad to see and say security is not really our stronger pillar. Europe has never based its policy on security. We have lived in peace, so now we have to face with this new reality. There were improvements, but still there are challenges. And what is really worrying is that other actors see these challenges we are facing, but not only, also European citizens see that, feel that, and are not really considering Europe today as a strong partner able to deal with other global power like the US and China on an equal basis. So yes, we are a security actor, but we really need to work a lot, starting to decide first within our borders, what do we really mean when we talk about security and how we want to implement our security architecture.
Tomasz, do you have any response or anything to add to that
Yes.
question, specifically given your background as well?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and great privilege for me to be part of this conversation together with you and Teresa. And I will indeed give you my military perspective, being an officer serving in a multinational corps, in a NATO multinational corps in Poland. I'm embedded in a structure that consists of 21 nations, member nations, officers who are serving in our multinational headquarters. 19 of which are European nations, 2 of which are North American nations. Americans and Canadians are part of this NATO force structure. And you know, from my lens, from my perspective, this multinational corps, just like the entire NATO command structure, analyzes very carefully what the security situation is, how it develops, how it deteriorates, as you said. Very dynamic world. Russia has very much become much more aggressive. It started in 2008, if you wish, with the invasion into Georgia, later twice into Ukraine, 2014 and again in 2022. And the hybrid activities that Russia is pursuing, hybrid warfare activities, also in the information space and cognitive space. The Russians are very active and trying to undermine the unity inside of Europe, inside of the Western civilization, I would say. That is a growing threat, a growing phenomenon. But from a multinational perspective, from the NATO perspective, I want to emphasize that, because you asked Europe, whether Europe is an actor. 30 NATO allies are European allies, you know. So if we say Europe, you can look at NATO Europe. If you look at Europe, you can look at broader Europe, all the European countries, including the victims of the Russian aggression, Georgia and Ukraine being 2 of those. Then also, if you look through the European Union lens, you will realize that a huge amount of European Union population is also part of NATO. NATO is a classical defense alliance that works since 77 years already, since the Washington Treaty was signed in 1949, embedded on principles of democracy. And I think even though there is turbulences a lot, and I don't want to comment on political developments because it's not my role, but from a military perspective, we look at the security threat and we look at the structures. And here I see the commitment and I see the stability of the alliance, of the forces of the alliance, being ready to defend against all the threats.
And specifically, given your perspective from the eastern flank, I'm interested. I mentioned a couple of crises in the beginning. Would you say that perhaps strategic attention regarding, I guess, security and military could be shifting away from Ukraine? Specifically given the US's commitment to kind of reshift priorities away from Europe, would you say that that's a concern? I'm interested to also hear your perspective, not only through the NATO lens, but also through the Polish lens as well, because I think those are 2 very distinctive nowadays, specifically regarding the relations with Ukraine.
Yeah, if you ask for the NATO lens, it is always a derivative of the 32 nations. It's a consensus-based alliance. So whatever the NATO lens is, the NATO stance is, it's also the Polish, the Italian, the other countries' lens. So that's something to be remembered. NATO is us, the member states. But on Ukraine, I see the legitimacy of your question. Indeed, a lot of tensions, a lot of efforts are being diverted. A lot of stuff is happening in Asia. But I think it is absolutely quintessential that we continue supporting Ukraine with whatever it requires to defend against the Russian aggression, ongoing aggression. It will be 4 years in a few weeks' time. Already huge effort by the entire Ukraine nation, whose independence has been questioned by Russia. And it is absolutely essential for us in Europe, but also in the alliance, to continue this support. And this support is ongoing. I see it. Even though there might be a lot of political chatter, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the pure packages being sent to Ukraine, I see the consistency of all the organizations, be it through the NATO, NSATU, JTAC, or Pearl initiative, or also the European Union is also doing a huge training effort. I see that these efforts are being continued, and the shipments of whatever Ukraine requires continue, and the proportion is growing. The European part of this assistance is growing annually. Last year, it was already more than or around 60% in 2025 of all the support that goes to Ukraine comes from Europe, NATO Europe, but also from Canada. And the US proportion is actually decreasing, but there's also a broader coalition that is supporting Ukraine. It's not just Europe, it's also several other democratic countries which are significantly supporting Ukraine. I think this support needs to stay, because Ukraine not only needs to get a peace deal with Russia, but they also need to be able to deter Russia against future aggressions as well.
Yeah, and another question that I would follow up with relates a lot to what Teresa was saying in terms of just how weak, for lack of better words, Europe has become as a security actor in terms of its ever-evolving relationship with the US, specifically with the new administration. I'm interested to hear more about the technicalities behind what do you think, from your military perspective, should be the security efforts that Europe should sort of handle or pursue in order for it to abate any threats that it's facing at the moment.
I want to stick to my NATO officer lane in this respect. So we are focusing on the defense of the territory of NATO, of our population, of our states, of our countries, the eastern flank, the core specifically for the Baltic Sea region, for the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And here, as we say in the military, the 50-meter target is the defense of the territory and the collective defense against a potential aggression from Russia. It's stated in our strategic concept that we have adopted at Madrid Summit in 2023. And I would say that that is something that Europe, the Europeans, need to focus on, to make sure that the Russians don't create a future fait accompli against any of our allies. So we are determined to do that. Whether Europe becomes a security actor globally, I leave this up to the political class. But from a military perspective, I think the most important thing is we make Europe secure, and we create the sense of security, which I think the alliance does very well with our growing capabilities. And we need to grow those capabilities because the environment has deteriorated, as I mentioned. Russia has grown its armed forces significantly, and they are sparing no effort to grow them even further, not just in order to they try to defeat Ukraine. I hope they will never do that, but they also grow their armed forces for other potential aggressive, opportune attacks in the future. And that we have to prevent at all costs.
And backpedaling to something that we've discussed consistently in terms of this initiative, when we're talking about Europe, what do we mean, right? Like the European Union, NATO, or just Europe overall? And my question regarding that, specifically considering, for example, recent threats over Greenland sovereignty, Teresa, I'm interested to sort of hear more about the technicalities now, not on the military side, but mostly on Europe itself. What shapes Europe's responses, in your opinion, or rather in your expertise? Would it be member states in the EU? Would it be all of Europe, even including non-EU member states? Would it be NATO? Where does the public also come into that equation, in your opinion?
So Greenland is really a stress test for Europe as a project, but also for Europe as a community of 27 countries and 27 capitals. So in the case of Greenland, I mean, it's also a very specific case because it belongs to Denmark. So this is really a matter of national sovereignty, and national sovereignty that needs to be dealt very carefully by the relevant capitals, but where the EU member states can jump in terms of support, of reaction towards any kind of decision, not statements, but decision by the US administration. As you know, we have a big issue today in Europe, which is how we vote. Many of the things linked to this very important decision, which can also be sanctions, eventual sanctions, our so-called bazooka, economic bazooka. I mean, all these things require a kind of vote. And we have the unanimity problem. So Greenland has showed again how is sometimes difficult inside the EU to reach this consensus. And this is why I think that beyond the crisis management, we should soon again relaunch a broader and constructive exchange of views inside of Europe on how we plan to continue to decide inside Europe, namely the unanimity problem, and try to find new ways of voting, because otherwise we will be continuously stuck. We have seen that many times with the sanctions against Russia, with some member states posing issues on the table, but also vetoing them. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine is an aggression, and we treated that exactly in those ways. Greenland, we will see how things will develop, of course, but can be another scenario similar to that. So we really need to speed up a little bit our thinking about how we vote as all member states, because it's all member states that take these important decisions.
Building on that, would you say that the actual policies that have been implemented by the European Union, you mentioned yourself that sanctions, for example, following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, would you say that's enough of a deterrent? And also, would you say that that has enhanced Europe's autonomy or rather decreased it? Because you also mentioned China, for example, which now has become an alternative supply for Europe. And would you say that that also poses another challenge to Europe, not only in terms of it being a security actor, but just even economy?
So at the beginning, probably sanctions were really a shock for us. So we needed some time to adjust. Our companies, European companies, really needed time to change their business model, the business model that has been shaping the relations with Russia in the last 15 years. Relation based on very strong energy ties, especially with some member states like Germany, like Italy. I mean, it was really a shock for the Italian and German companies to deal with this new approach. I think also about our companies present in Russia, I mean, it really took time to change the model approach. Now, we can say that despite all the criticism regarding sanctions, of course, they're not perfect. It was, I mean, the first time for Europe to impose such a massive a list of packages of sanctions against such a vital economic partner for us. So they are not perfect, but they reached some results. At least we showed that we could be autonomous and that we could look for other opportunities. Of course, the opportunities we looked at, I think about new energy cooperation with some countries from North Africa and beyond, which have serious democratic issues, were not ideal, but this is what we could do at that moment. And I hope that based on this experience, we might learn the lesson and try to have a more diversified strategy and portfolio for the future.
And going back to the issue of Greenland, I'm interested to hear how do you perceive it through a NATO perspective? Does this set a dangerous precedent for the future of NATO, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's definitely relevant question. But inside of the alliance, I'm aware that there is a very intense discussions ongoing in the North Atlantic Council. I want to remind of the motto of the alliance: in consulendo animus liber. So the spirit lies in consultation. And I've served in the headquarters of the alliance for several years. I've seen those sessions. I am positive that the effort inside of the alliance to diffuse any tension, because there is tension, and there was frequently tension in the 77 years of the alliance. Allies actually got many times into different types of tensions historically. So this is yet another tensious moment. But luckily, there is a huge group of nations which are all democracies, all have the same values that they signed up to. And those values apply. And those values, the democratic values, have also been reconfirmed by the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. The democratic oversight, if you wish, of the parliamentarians of all the 32 capitals just recently, over and over again, that the fundamental values, the democratic values, are the bedrock, if you wish, of the alliance. So from a defense perspective, Greenland is a very vital piece that needs to be defended, and there might be adversaries who may have malicious non-allied adversaries who may have malicious intent, and we need to protect allied territory. And in this sense, Greenland needs to be well protected, and a lot of NATO efforts, exercises are taking place, with the inclusion of course, Denmark as the host nation, but also with other allies, with the Americans, with Canadians, with the Nordic countries who are participating primarily. It's always a 360 principle in the alliance, that 360 meaning all allies are contributing to different exercises. And the exercises are there in order to deter and in order to get more efficient in terms of the defense. So those exercises take place, and they're being planned also for the next near future, for the next years. And I would leave it with this. I hope that this political tensions will be diffused, and that allies will come to grips.
And there seems to be an ongoing sort of clash, also even through security perspectives, in the sense of, you think of the north, the south of Europe, you also think of the east and the west. They seem to kind of have very different priorities. You think of the east, and obviously Russia is the biggest threat. But then you think of the south, and they're more focused on the Mediterranean, right? They're more focused on the migration issue. Mm-hmm. I'm interested to hear how whether Europe you think, and this is a question to the both of you now, how is Europe balancing these different perspectives, and whether you think that's perhaps the main reason why Europe is so fragmented into coming up with a consistent defense strategy. Teresa?
I think that Greenland, and thanks for raising this point, can be a very important next step for Europe to try to unify its security vision. I mean, Greenland is not part of the EU, of course, but it's strongly linked to the EU because of Denmark, because of our shared community of values. And Europe might not be the frontline security actor at the moment, but we are for sure a democracy provider of an architecture based on defense of society, of human rights, of social values, of culture, shared culture. And I think that what is happening around Greenland can really be for Europe that opportunity to finally have a shared approach. As you said, for years, for decades, we really had different perspective about our security. I remember when the big migration waves hit Europe, Greece, Spain. We felt that our fellows in Poland, in the northern state, really did not understand what was going on. For sure, it was an issue of our bad communication, for sure, but we felt that for some years. When the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, it was a reverse process. Our fellow citizens and policymakers from Poland, from other countries closest to Ukraine and to Russia, for sure felt that we, Southern Europeans, could not really understand the threat. This is a reality. It's not a negative definition of Europe. It's human. Europe is based on human society values and is based on differences. So it's normal. It took time to unify our approach towards the Russian aggression. Things are changing because also citizens in Southern Europe really feel what is going on in Ukraine. We gave a lot of support, not of course at the level of Poland, Germany, and Lithuania, and other even smaller countries inside the EU, but we really felt it. And now I think that with Greenland, we can really start, I want to be very positive on that, despite the very negative mood and the uncertainty. I think that our reaction on Greenland can really be this unifying view and vision that we need as Europeans, which say, look, we are not protecting only our domestic, let's say, architecture of values and rights, but we want to protect, we want to look beyond, and we consider Greenland as part of this vision and of this strategy.
Tomasz, do you have any comments?
Yeah, maybe also on the different threat perceptions, as you said, those are natural because of the far away regions, different threats from different directions. Teresa mentioned the migration crisis. I remember how it started in Poland and around Poland, also against the Baltic states. This was the second half of 21. So it was actually just prior to the invasion of Russia against Ukraine, which started in February 22. And it was a clear preparation, and in concert, actually, it was a typical hybrid warfare instrumentalization of human beings from the MENA region, from the Middle East and North Africa, but also from Asia. Young people have been incentivized and brought into Belarus in order to cross the border into the European Union through Poland in order to destabilize Poland and the region so that Poland and the region could not support Ukraine. That was a clear cause and effect plan, a vicious plan by Russia, which Poland fended off. This is just to illustrate how complex the security environment is. It's not just hard power, it's also different hybrid activities. But I also want to stress again that there is a very good mechanism inside of the alliance that deals with threats, with managing threats. It is the Article 4 in the alliance. And again, it's 30 nations, 30 European nations, including non-European Union nations, such as Turkey, but many others, Norway as well, and I could list, there's seven such countries, where they use the Article 4 in order to make consultations among allies. And Turkey has, for instance, multiple times used this article when it felt threatened between 2002, 2020. Those were several times where Turkey in the south was threatened by the situation around Turkey, where it invited allies to consult. Poland has initiated such consultations as well after the first invasion, after Crimea was taken, together with 7 allies after the second invasion. On the day of the invasion, actually, Article 4, the consultations took place. Estonia was also calling Article 4 for the first time in its history in September last year. Poland as well, again, after an unprecedented attack of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, crossing into Polish airspace early September. Those mechanisms can be used by any ally from any region, from Italy, from Spain. Allies know this, and they use this article whenever they feel it is necessary. What does it mean? It means actually that allies sit down at the table at the North Atlantic Council with the 30 European countries, and they deliberately discuss how do we deal with this threat perception, how do we alleviate, what countermeasures can we do? Do we just assure the ally or do we send troops and so on? Every single ally has this in their toolbox they can use. Some allies choose not to do it for various reasons, but other allies use it purposefully in order to electrify and in order to get the other allies to the table. I've seen this article being in action when I served at the headquarters a couple times, and I believe this is a very effective tool, which is also not being overused. It has been used just a few times in history in the 77 years.
To follow that, how fast would you say the response is? So you have these discussions all together, all member states of NATO, at the council, then you come to an agreement. There needs to be a response to this. Where do the troops? When do the troops come in and go to these territories that are being threatened?
Thank you for this question. It is a case by case. If you analyze the 8 or 9 cases that the alliance had, you had immediate responses by, you have four instruments of power, the DIME principle: diplomacy, information, military, and economic. Right? You asked me for the military. The military instrument is an instrument that the alliance can use, but sometimes it reverts to diplomacy and just the information domain. The alliance doesn't deal with the economics, right? But with the first 3, it deals. There is an immediate response in the Stratcom domain, in the information domain, because the council meets on the same day, essentially, when the article is called. So the communique, the press statement takes place immediately. And sometimes the military action takes place already on the same day because a plan is being activated. But sometimes it was the case that Sakir, the Supreme Allied Commander, was tasked by the Council to come up with a plan, and then it's sometimes a matter of days. When you analyze, for instance, the Polish case, in September. Article 4 was called after the incursion of the airspace, and it took the Allied command structure 1 or 2 days to come up with a new defensive activity, the Eastern Shield activity, very comprehensive, not just to protect Poland, but also the entire eastern flank. And this activity is ongoing. This deterrence activity is ongoing since September last year. Turkey, when it called for Article 4 back in the early 2000s, because of the threat of the potential recapture of seized terrain by Iraq against Kuwait, that is more than 20 years ago, Turkey received AWACS aircraft, meaning surveillance aircraft, but also Patriot systems, which were sent to southern Turkey in order to protect the Turkish population against potential retaliatory strikes, because the alliance was using Turkey as a allied used, not the alliance, but allies used Turkey as a launch pad to launch operations, and they felt threatened. So that took also a few days, and then I guess a few weeks before the deployments took place, because you don't deploy certain systems in a matter of hours, but days. It takes a little bit time. But aircraft are being deployed hours and within days, actually. So it depends also a little bit on the systems. But I have seen Article 4s which only had the information space, reassurance, and I have seen Article 4s which launched actually defense plans and created new activities, new defensive measures of the alliance.
And to build on this, I'm interested to hear your perspective on, in your expertise, how much democratic input is put on place when it comes to such decisions, right? Like countering responses to what's currently happening revolving around Greenland, or even diplomatic responses towards what happened in Venezuela recently. I'm interested to hear whether you think that there's any input, really democratic input put into place, because there's this ongoing criticism, and it's been the case for a while now, that it seems as if these opinions, or rather decisions or policy and whatnot, are through a top-bottom approach. And we are now jumping into the human dimension as well here, sort of addressing the dissatisfaction that the public's opinion has revolving around having their voices heard. So I'm interested to hear more about where does democracy fall into place when it comes to this bigger scale responses. Teresa?
I would start saying that, of course, politicians are elected by citizens, at least in democratic settings. So politicians might pretend they don't read the polls, they don't listen to citizens, they don't see protests on the streets, but they see them, they analyze what is going on, and they take it into consideration very carefully. And this justifies what we have seen in the last 4 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. Most of European politicians' reactions and behavior were based exactly on the fact that they read very carefully what is going on in their own society, because they have to meet expectation, they have to follow the fears, because unfortunately, although we lived in decades of peace until 2022, okay, fear is what drives society. We had, as I said at the beginning, all the crises we had to face, and the main driver of all those crises were citizens' fear, how to deal with it, how to guarantee security to citizens, and how to reassure them that we were there as Europe, as not only a beautiful political peace project, but as a provider of security. So that is why it's very important. I mean, and now more than ever is important to make this process more democratic.
Would you say that there is also misalignment between the European Union and its citizens in regards to their use of the European Court of Justice? I'm thinking of the EU-Mercosur deal that was just signed, and I remember the protests in Brussels, specifically by villagers and agricultural workers that would not want this deal to follow through. Could you comment on that as well?
I mean, those protests were the perfect signal of how democracy works. I mean, and policymakers need to accept that, need to analyze that, need to talk. Of course, there are corporates. I mean, we all know we are not living in the perfect world. We all know that there are many interests behind this, but there is also a strong sense of ownership by European citizens. I think that European citizens sometimes are treated like passive actors, just waiting there for policymaker decision. It's not true. I mean, citizens are an active pillar of our European society, which is not happening in other countries. This is why the EU is still so appealing when we look at abroad. This is why people want to come to Europe, because Europe is still a place where citizens can have an active role in society. And the protests in Brussels, what happened around the Mercosur deal was not great in that specific moment, okay? We needed to show unity. We needed to show that we can react fastly. So it's my personal view that it was not great, this stop, this slowing down, but in different times, normal times, if we can consider our times normal, I would have rather said, okay, it's just a little obstacle, but this is how democracy works. We have institutions. We have institutions that have to deal with this thing, to judge this thing, and make statements based on data, based on real numbers, and not on political schemes and some hidden interest. But this is how democracy works. So yes, it's a stop. It took quite a long time to get there, but we will overcome it. We didn't send the perfect sign to our global partner, to partners in Latin America. I'm completely aware of that, but we have a strong partnership with them. We have a technological partnership with them. We are a point of reference for democracy to them, and we benefit a lot of our cooperation with them. So I'm sure we will overcome it, and I'm sure that, if we manage to have a unified position on Russia with 27 different views, I'm sure that we will overcome also this. It might take some time, but this is how democracy works, and we need to sometimes to pay this price.
I want to jump to the increase in defense budgeting, which I mentioned way in the beginning. And again, we're going to the public opinion. You guys are both experts within your own right, so obviously you have your own perspective, but the public opinion sees numbers, right? They see how expensive the grocery prices are, for example. So my question to that is, how's Europe sort of excusing or justifying these trade-offs? That, okay, the defense expenditure is going to be higher, but we're doing it to protect you. How is that communication being done? And whether it's a priority from the NATO perspective, or rather from the NATO countries' perspective, and also from the EU. Tomasz, I guess you could start.
Yeah, thank you. We should be cognizant that the allies, the 32 allies, including 30 European allies, have agreed in The Hague, at the Hague summit last year that we would grow our defense expenditures not only just to 2%, but now to 5%. A huge, I would say, unprecedented target that has been set, a commitment, a necessary commitment from a military perspective, given the threat environment which we talked about earlier. And of course, it's split between 3.5% for pure defense and 1.5% for other security related, but overall 5% for defense. And if you look at the map of Europe, at the map of NATO, you will realize that the eastern flank countries are either at the 5% rate or very close to the 5% rate already. You couldn't complain that Poland, that the Baltic states, that the countries directly bordering with Russia are not doing their job. They actually elevated and enhanced their defense expenditures for the last 2, 3, 4 years, and they are planning to do so further. It comes at a huge cost. It comes at huge sacrifice in the societies. I can only speak from my country, from Poland. I'm observing this because a lot of other areas are affected. You know, there's only one budget. You have other requirements, education, science, you know, transportation. Transportation can be put into military, but healthcare, for instance, you know, all those domains are being trimmed and are being hampered because of defense. But here there's a overall consensus, also given our historical background. I want to remind that Poland had a murky history against with Russia. We actually fought 18 wars, if you count it by different historical accounts, against Russia over the last 400 years, and Russia invaded us over and over again. The last one was in World War II. So Poland understands what the threat from Russia means. Poland is very empathetic towards Ukraine, understanding very well. Poland understands that what Russia wants to do against the Baltic states as well, that Russia fought a war against Finland. So it is not so difficult for the eastern flank countries to actually come up with these defense expenditures. But as the newest national security strategy, but also national defense strategy of the United States, we have been just published in the last few weeks. When you read them, you realize that the United States expects Europe. Not only did we commit ourselves at the Hague Summit, but the US now stipulates this very clearly, that it expects Europe actually to pick up its defense, deterrence and defense responsibilities, you know, to be able to defend. So that is yet another impetus, another trigger for Europe, for European countries, even those who are not so close to the border, to pick up the defense expenditures, because the requirements are quite high. We have consumed a lot of peacetime dividend, if you wish, after the end of Cold War. And a lot of capabilities, military capabilities, have been simply neglected, have not been invested into. We not only need to kind of match, but we also need to catch up. We need to rebuild certain capabilities in Europe, which have been underfunded and neglected for many years. So now is the time actually to build those capabilities, not for aggressive purposes, but in order to defend Europe. I could not imagine how Europe decides to attack anyone, but I can imagine Europe wanting to defend its democratic oversight. Maybe just one sentence to the previous question that you asked to Teresa. You mentioned checks and balances. I just want to confirm this, you know, from a NATO perspective. When I observe the Paul Mill dialogue, you know, the militaries always execute what the political class expects them. The military develops a military advice, it develops military response options, recommendations, and it's always the political class that decides where the money goes, how much we spend, where we engage, what type of defense programs we will pursue based on recommendations. But I see this both at the national levels in the democratic countries of European Union, of NATO, but I also see this inside of the alliance, where we have a North Atlantic Council, which is the political, and then the military, which is working towards the North Atlantic Council, providing military advice and providing military response options. And it's always a political decision whether we go right, left, or whether we do this or that, you know.
Teresa?
Well, so if migration monopolized the public European debate for 15 years, I think, now it's defense and security monopolizing this debate at the national level and, of course, at the European level. It's something new. Although the invasion started 4 years ago, although we had Crimea, because this is another mistake we tend to do as Europeans. We always refer to what is going on, thinking about the invasion of, the recent invasion of Ukraine, but it's something that is going on for a lot of years. We missed the opportunity during these years to talk concretely about defense. I mean, I remember people trying very mildly to launch the idea of the European army. Then there was silence for years. And now we have to face this again, which is a very complicated project at the moment. We should have done this before, at least to be inside NATO, to really start building this famous European pillar of NATO. In Rome, we organize a lot of conferences about the European pillar of NATO, but at the end of the conference, no one knows what is really about. And for example, the European army could have been a good starting point for that, to really be a reliable and stronger pillar inside NATO. Having said that, I think that to tackle this issue of defense and security inside the public debate, which we really need to do, one idea could be to link this to economic security. You mentioned, I mean, at the end of the month, people look at prices as grocery. They need to pay their bills. They have families. And people care only about their economic stability. It was the same through all the crises we went through, from the financial to migration to COVID. I mean, what mattered at the end of the day was how I'm going to survive as a person. So I think that in this case, a very good way to explain to citizens how important this issue is today, how vital is to link it to economic security, explaining that defense is not just about building tanks. I mean, the war today is not done in Europe with tanks. I mean, Tomasz mentioned many times, we are already in a hybrid war on a daily basis. I mean, we are continuously attacked by Russia and China together. We have so many actors trying to undermining our democratic architecture, and the hybrid war is our daily bread. So we need to explain to people that I'm investing in defense and security to guarantee that your undersea cable are safe, so you have the connection. You're not out of society. Our life is based on technology today. We could not live without technology. Look at what happened in Ukraine with heating. I mean, this can happen also in Europe. And this is how you should explain to people. If you then don't have heating for 2 weeks, what is going on for the business? What is going on to your daily life? If a drone flies over Fiumicino Airport and the airport is closed for 2 days, what is going to happen? Apart from the panic and the social, fear, shops, people, jobs, everything. And these are the ways that we experts have a very important role, not only the policymaker, we experts, people from academia, people from civil society, we should all contribute to this debate without scaring people. I know that the Polish perception of Russia is much different from the Italian one. I'm perfectly aware about that. But this is how you need to target the communication, however, under a common umbrella, a common European umbrella. I know that Polish Prime Minister Tusk will have his own way of talking to his citizens because they border with Belarus, they border with Ukraine, they're close to Russia. Our Prime Minister in Italy, Meloni, and our Defense Minister have a different way to talk to Italians. However, we need to stick to a common European language. And this is, I think, the correct way to talk to citizens and make defense and security something, let me use this word, normal, because it's part of our society and we have to deal with that.
I agree with that. I think the exciting thing about this initiative is that whenever we think of democracy or security, we think of it very abstractly, right? We think of it as something just an ideal and stuff that is behind the scenes. We're not actors in it, but it's conversations like these that I think welcome people in. It could be a bit intimidating, I believe, for the public opinion to understand sort of how military officials handle such issues, how EU officials handle these issues, but we have to also all realize that, as you previously mentioned, it's voters that put those people in power. So at the end of the day, it is our power. I want to thank the both of you so much for your contributions. Democracy matters, peace matters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you for watching the episode to the very end. Please like and subscribe across all of our social media platforms. Thank you.